esteemed participants, good afternoon. It is with great pleasure that I welcome all of you to our 19th Geneva Security debate. The focus for this afternoon session is on preventing violent extremism at the community level. For those perhaps less familiar with this format, each month we unite the world's leading thinkers and practitioners for interactive discussions on issues affecting security. And it is my great pleasure that today we are joined by the president of Interpeace, Itonde Kagoma. Welcome. We are joined by the Deputy Director of Programs at the Kofi Annan Foundation, and from the Global Community Engagement Resilience Fund, GCERF, we have the Deputy Director and, of course, the Director, my friend Khalid Koser, with us today. Often, these Geneva security debates focus on global issues. Today, we will look more at the national and at the community level experiences in preventing violent extremism. And to that end, we are pleased to collaborate with GCERF, the Global Community Engagement Resilience Fund, for several reasons. One, obviously, you're an esteemed partner of us. But, I also want to mention a second reason. You're, in a way, a success story for the GCSP. Most of you may know that we have here at the center the Creative Spark. The Creative Spark is an incubation space for brilliant ideas in the field of peace and security. And, people would come to us with these ideas and make them here, make them mature, make them ready to implement. And in that sense, whenever I talk about the Creative Spark, I mention GCERF as a success story. So we are extremely proud that somehow you came out of the GCSP. We have today here present some of GCERF's national and regional advisors, and I would welcome you wholeheartedly to Geneva and to our center and the Maison de la Paix. You will share with us best practices against violent extremism from a wide range of country settings, Burkina Faso, Kyrgyzstan, Iraq, Mozambique, the Philippines, and Somalia. Looking at a diverse set of country experiences is helpful because extremism exists to varying degrees in different parts of the world, and it manifests itself in various ways, including political, religious, ethnic, gender-based, and ideological. That said, the result is often the same. It's hatred, it's violence, it's the ripping of the social fabrics of our societies. Much focus has been devoted to countering violent extremism, well, particularly through law enforcement. This is necessary, no doubt about it, but it's clearly not sufficient. Prevention is also vital, and it requires a whole-of-society approach. Civil society is often closest to those most vulnerable in their communities and therefore is well placed to strengthen resilience at the local level. Here at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, we provide both policy advice and customized courses to bolster such efforts. And I know that many of our partners here today help to build capacity. Strengthening partnerships is really critical. In the same way that terrorists and extremists operate in networks, we need to build benign networks to counteract them. So when the bad guys get together, I think also we, the good guys, should do the same. This event, this Geneva Security Debate, has therefore two objectives: to learn about the latest best practices in preventing violent extremism at the community level, and to strengthen our networks and partnerships. I hope that this Geneva Security Debate will help leverage the collective wisdom present in this room. Furthermore, I hope we will explore new innovative ideas on preventing violent extremism. Thank you for your important work on this topic and for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grammingham. Let me introduce you this very distinguished and diverse panel. I counted. Altogether, they have traveled about 12,000 kilometers, if we add their kilometers together. Let me introduce them to you. Mr. Yusuf Utorata, who is a public policy professional with 15 years of experience working in the public service and international NGOs. He also served as the Secretary General of a municipality of over 120,000 people. And since July 2021, he is serving as GCERF's National Advisor in Burkina Faso. Welcome, Yusuf. Next to Yusuf, we have Miss Jennifer Buan, who is an experienced legal professional with a Juris Doctor degree in the Philippines. Her diverse expertise and experience in legal profession for more than 15 years brings a unique advantage in her current position as the Philippines and National Advisor for GCERF. And Jen has joined us as the first national advisor and built the way for all the 16 colleagues that are now currently working with GCERF. Thank you, Jen, for coming all the way from the Philippines. Next to me is Miss Carmen Munquete. Carmen is from Mozambique and she has over 20 years of experience working in the development field with the various United Nations agencies and the government. She has been also lecturing master students on climate change, disaster risk reduction, and so on. Carmen is serving as a national advisor in Mozambique. Thank you, Carmen, for being with us. On my right, we have Mr. Keneshbek Shainazarov, who is enabling a wide range of programs related to preventing violent extremism, conflict-sensitive journalism, promoting freedom of religion, youth and women empowerment, and track 2 diplomacy in Central Asia for more than 10 years. Mr. Shainazarov has over totally 20 years of experience, and he also currently serves as a board of directors and advisory council in several state and international organizations. Kenesh is joining us from Kyrgyzstan, Bishkek. Thank you, Kenesh. And next to Kenesh, Mr. Omar Dulimi. Omar is an international development professional with over 7 years of experience, really working on violent extremism in the Middle East and North Africa region, in Jordan, but he also worked in Washington, D.C. Omar is based in Baghdad, Iraq, and works as a national advisor of GCERF. And last but not least, Miss Murio Omar Shuriye, who is an international development professional with extensive expertise in political transition, governance, value chain development. She is passionate about gender mainstreaming and women empowerment. Murio is currently based in Mogadishu, serving as one of GCERF's national advisors in Somalia. So please welcome colleagues, and we really, really appreciate you to be here. And let's kickstart. So this today's session is about how can we break the vicious cycles of insecurity through resilience and transition. We have seen that in the last few years, especially in the last quarter, there have been a lot of insecurity, increased insecurity across the globe. There is the Russian aggression of Ukraine. There is Israel's bombardment of Palestine. There is climate change. COP28 has rung a lot of alarm bells. But we still believe at GCERF that there is hope for optimism, But I let you decide at the end of this panel whether there is optimism, at least at the community level. Maybe not everyone is aware, the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund is a global fund that gives grants, resources to local civil society organizations to prevent violent extremism. And we are currently working in 22 countries. So let me start by turning to my colleague at the Philippines, Jen. So GCERF has been providing grants since 2020, primarily to support the peace process and various elements of peace process from a preventing violent extremism perspective. And this has been one of the most successful peace processes around the world. However, recently, there was an attack, a bombing at the University of Mindanao. What is behind of this? Why did it tick up again? Why is it trying to destabilize?
Thank you, Lila. First of all, a peaceful afternoon to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share about our work in the Philippines. Just to focus more on the optimistic side, so I would like to emphasize again that we take pride in having one of the most successful models of peace processes in the world, in the Philippines, because of the commitment of the parties. We have had a 40-year conflict between the government and Moro separatist group, which ended in a 2014 peace pact. Because of the commitment of the parties, we now have an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao that is governed by former rebels, and former combatants and their communities are transitioning into normal life. This is a long process, and the transitional period ends in 2025, where communities, voters will elect a permanent parliament. So this is a very unique model. However, I give the however here, there are spoilers of the peace processes. We have local terrorist groups who did not buy into this process, who leveraged on disgruntled members of rebel groups, who also leveraged on disillusioned youth whose grievances were not addressed. And this was the backdrop of the 2017 Marawi siege, where local terrorist groups took over the city of Marawi. So fast forward, after the Marawi siege, several international, national, and regional efforts were built into building community resilience. We saw the city of Marawi rebuilt, but recently, as Lila has mentioned, there was an attack in the Mindanao State University, which has always been seen as a neutral ground. And from our community partners, we see that this is the result of growing frustrations from the communities that we have visited. We still have an estimate of 80,000 displaced residents of Marawi, many of them in temporary shelters. And the greatest issue that we see is lack of access to services, including water. And this is what we saw personally when we visited Marawi, including our executive director here. And these grievances are growing, and ISIS actually came out with a statement recently leveraging on these disgruntled feelings. And we see that if the government does not address these grievances, the frustrations will grow and grow. That is why we believe that supporting the communities is very important.
So Jen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this account. How can an organization like GCERF or others provide community support that is actually resonates with the people and addresses some of these grievances that can drive violent extremism?
So since 2019, GCERF has been supporting programs in the ground. We have worked with community members. For example, in the city of Marawi, we've worked with internally displaced people. And we have seen how it is important to connect the communities to government. Building the trust between communities and government is very important to prevent these growing frustrations. So, for example, we have seen youth groups who have formed themselves into organized community patrollers. They are the ones talking to their communities, seeing what needs to be done, and then capacitating them how to talk to government officials. And we have a very concrete example how this has helped. For example, one shelter, the Pagalamatan shelter in Marawi, their issue of lack of water was simply brought out in a radio program. And this radio program was heard by local government officials. And we use this as a means to reach out to national government. We organized meetings for them with national government officials. And a few days after, the local government and the regional government came in to see how water services can be provided to them. So it's just in a nutshell, it's simply bridging the gap between the communities and having a platform for them to talk to government and giving them the capacity to voice out their concerns and learn about their rights and be able to find alternative ways to find solutions for their problems.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you. And there will be opportunities also to ask questions at the end of the two panels from Jen. And just building on what you said about connecting people, I'm turning to Carmen from Mozambique, where GCERF is about to start programming in the northern districts, and where a lot of recruitment happens by the different non-state armed groups, including violent extremist groups. And we know that Mozambique kind of came in the hotspots 3 years ago when there was the attack in Palma, and a lot of dozens of internationals and nationals have been executed in a very brutal way. There have been thousands of people displaced. But what happened since in the past 3 years? And are things getting better, Carmen? And what can we do in terms of PV programming to try to reduce radicalization and recruitment?
Okay, thank you, Lila. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, unfortunately, the situation is not improving. Over the last 3 years, what we have been seeing is the number of internal displaced people has been increased twice each year. And now I would say that near to 1 million people are directly affected by this situation. And I must mention here that besides these violent extremism organizations that are acting up there, the north side of country used to be and still the less developed side of the country, where poverty is really high. And for those ones who follow about our country, you may know that the majority of population is youth. So we are talking about youth, unemployed youth without any kind of opportunities. And as it happens in many countries, these groups use the fact that these youth, they don't have any kind of opportunity to recruit and include them. And many of these youth that are involved in these conflicts belong to that area. They are from Cabo Delgado, Niassa, and recently Nampula province. Well, in a result, the situation is getting worse. There are no improvements so far. Even this week, 2-3 days ago, recently we have 2 or 3 districts that have been facing the same problem. And this came on top of, I would say, the difficult situation our population is going through. I must mention that by the end of 2023, near to 62% of the population was still living below poverty line. So besides other impacts such as climate change, for those ones follow information, we have been known worldwide by these big cyclones, tropical storms, droughts and flooding every year, almost every year. So the situation is really difficult. And so far, like I would say that by the beginning up to the beginning of 2023, main interventions in country had to do with humanitarian response to address these challenges. and also the development efforts done by our government and partners. And GCERF came in country just to fill the gap and help in reducing recruitment in a way of preventing violent extremism. And the sport area is exactly where we are acting in these 3 provinces. And we are just starting a program, try to, I would say, to address the root causes of this situation, which is unemployment, as I mentioned before. Working with, we decided, looking at that situation, to work with these youth as our main target group. And we are doing it in a very participative way, I must mention, involving communities in prioritizing these activities, working side by side by government as well. And in a result, like, we have a great, I would say, plan. We are just starting, our partners are getting their first grants now to start the activities. And what is planned so far is invest on different economic opportunities, taking in account the current situation, small business initiatives, building up on of course, as I mentioned, climate change, smart agriculture initiatives, while also building social cohesion through interreligious dialogue, because religion is also one of the issues there. Try to bring the communities together. I must mention proudly that our legal framework is good in terms of involving youth in decision-making process, but it's about creating space, really, provide them space to be part of these forums. What GCERF is doing is, with our partners, just facilitating to make sure that, first of all, we are building their capacity to be part of these forums. Second, we discuss with all stakeholders to make sure that they are sitting there, they are part of decision-making, and at a certain point they benefit from the investments.
Excellent. So participatory and connecting, similarly to the Philippines, where we are connecting youth to local authorities, local government, and letting their voice heard. Well, good luck for us to the program in Mozambique. Thank you very much. Because ladies first, and I'm biased, let me turn to my colleague from Somalia, Murillo. So Somalia, we all know, in this sector has been affected by at least 3 decades of conflict. Al-Shabaab is known for everyone, which is a very brutal terrorist organization. Until today, regular attacks happen despite of a lot of international and national efforts. However, Somalia has a new government, and there is a lot of thinking going in, and things are becoming nationalized and really localized. How do the global events such as climate change and the Russian aggression on Ukraine having an effect, despite this new wave and new spirit that is coming into Somalia?
First, thank you, Lila. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time to listen to us. As you may know, Somalia is greatly affected by climate change impacts. In a year of 12 months, it's either drought that goes to the level of famine sometimes, or it's flooding that really affects the fundamentals of the society. As you may know, majority of the Somali community are pastoralists, and there's a huge loss of livestock, failed crops, increased displacement of people internally that happens because of these climate change impacts. And this has greatly impacted the security and the peace initiatives that the government is leading on the ground. So Al-Shabaab, we also have Al-Shabaab who's also doing their stuff in the country. And they take advantage of the vulnerability of people that had already been impacted by climate by positioning themselves as service or relief providers. So they entice people. They also use the climate narratives for their recruitment of youth into their groups. The Ukraine and Russia war also had a great impact on Somalia, where 90% of Somalia grains was coming from those 2 countries, and there was a huge deficit of supply of grains and food in the country. That really impacted the already overwhelming situations in terms of food security. So all this summed up also is what Al-Shabaab also taking advantage on the ground.
Thank you so much, Murillo. GCERF has, however, been programming in Somalia for the past 3 years, trying to address unemployment, some of the effects of climate change, or providing alternative narratives to some of the narratives that have been brought on by Al-Shabaab. And focusing in the southern side of the country, which is perhaps less crowded than other parts of Somalia. What are some of the lessons learned and good practices that could be applied elsewhere to perhaps amplify the effect and really contribute to the efforts of the federal government of Somalia in increasing security?
When GCERF went into Somalia like 3 years ago, I remember we started having engagement with the government at the government level, and we haven't gone down into community levels. So one of the lessons that we learned was some of the activities were not doing well because they were not community-led. So that was a good lesson that we learned, and we engaged the community levels, different sectors where we use a multi-sectoral approach and doing engagement with the government, the communities, different sectors in the communities, youth, women, at the community level to help us lead in designing their initiatives so as we can be able to support them with that. So that was one of the lessons that we learned. And the other thing was gender mainstreaming, where there was an issue of participation of women in the first place when we first started. So we used different approaches where we encourage our local civil society organizations to put into a consideration of those issues in terms of having both women, young men, and female children, all sectors, all across the community to be part and active participant in those initiatives that we are doing there.
Excellent, thank you so much. So gender mainstreaming and multi-sectoral approach, maybe the two keywords that are contributing to successful programming. So while we are still staying in Africa, let me turn to my dear colleague Yusuf from Burkina Faso. You all know that Burkina Faso is currently extremely affected by terrorist and violent extremist groups. They are number 2 on the Global Terrorism Index, and according to their prediction, there is a 50% increase in deaths due to terrorism in Burkina Faso. A large number of schools, about a quarter of the schools, are closed down because of terrorists and different groups. And GCERF has been programming there also for some time, trying to address some of the key drivers of why people are becoming radicalized and recruited, including limited or lack of employment of young people, conflict between the farmers and the herders, and of course, governance-related issues. There has been also a coup d'etat in Burkina Faso. Even though the picture is quite grim, can an organization like GCERF support local civil society organizations to make a difference in the life of communities from a prevention perspective?
Thank you very much, Lila. Thank you for everybody. As you say, insecurity has created a lot of problems, including political problems. And we are now, the country is now led by a military regime. So that's means that the focus is on military action. But other organizations, there is still opportunities for other organizations to work on soft solution, and those soft solutions are necessary in order to create avenue in order to build social cohesion and also bring the community together. As you say, Burkina is not just geographically the core of West Africa and the Sahel. Now it's the core of insecurity in the Sahel. So it started as a spillover effect from Mali, but now it's a homegrown problem. And those violent extremist groups, they work on, let's say, social grievance and economic and political grievance. But also there are some aspects like some point of vulnerability, like climate change. Climate change in Burkina, it means that the productivity in terms of agricultural activity is very low. So farmers have to increase by 20-50% their land in order to face their need and also face the growing of the population. And the extension of those farms also mean that there's a shrinking of the pastoral space, the grazing space for the pastoral community. So it also means that there are a lot of conflict between the pastoral and agricultural community. And the violent extremist group use those problems in order to recruit in the pastoral community. And this comes with consequences, as you said. We had at some point about 2 million displaced people, but now it's a little bit improving, with about 1/4 of the school also which are closed. So with GCERF grants, we support local organization because, as I say, in addition to the military action, there is space, there's room for local organization to act. And to address the climate change problem, what our grantee does is to delimitate animal grazing space in an inclusive way between farmers and pastoral community and officials, so that to reduce the conflict related to pastoralism. And also there are drilling the provision of water point for animals, and thus also reduce the competition for natural resources. So these are the kind of action that GCERF support. One important element is the kids. We have a grant that focus on the kids, because you know the kids are victims of violent extremism, but there are sometimes actors. But whether actors or victims, there are victims, because they are kids, they don't know what they are doing. So the way to treat those kids should be very specific, and our grant support communities in addressing, and also the security community, the criminal chain actors, in order to manage those cases with a child-based approach. And because this is necessary, we need those kids. Those are the future for Burkina Faso. So we need to build their resilience. And lastly, as I say, Burkina is the core of West Africa. It was a spillover in Burkina, but the risk is that insecurity will spill over to coastal countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Benin. So it's very important to address this problem from a cross-border approach, and that's what GCERF is going to do by deploying action in those coastal countries as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive account, Youssef. And you are right. GCERF is also starting programming in Ghana, and we will see how we can support other areas as well. Thank you. Let's move out from Africa and let's go to the Middle East, to my dear colleague Omar from Baghdad. Iraq's place on the Global Terrorism Index has increased, and now they are number 7. They used to be in the top 3, so well done. And of course, since Raqqa was liberated in 2017 from Daesh, billions of dollars have been poured in to strengthen stabilization in the entire country and try to tackle the issue of millions of displaced people, support them to return home. The government of Iraq is also making conscious efforts to return their citizens from northeast Syria, from the various camps. But there is climate change. There are all these new regional dynamics that have been generated or coming to surface, especially as a kind of effect of Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Within this, what is happening? What can we do to support the efforts of the government of Iraq to keep on this positive path?
Thank you, Lila. So as you mentioned, Iraq now is enjoying a period of stability that it has not seen for the past 2 to 3 decades. However, Israel's war on Gaza and the looming climate crisis is putting serious threats on this stability. In terms of the Israel war on Gaza, what's happening in Iraq is a resumption of kinetic and military activity that we have seen now between the US military and kind of Shia militia groups in Iraq under the umbrella of the Islamic resistance. What's being seen is that kind of attacks on US military bases and US military kind of responding through targeted attacks kind of on rural areas in Iraq or sometimes within the cities. But so far, this conflict has been contained, but we have yet to see how will that progress. Just yesterday, early this morning, there was an attack near Baghdad by US military targeting militia headquarters. Moving on to the more serious and I believe the looming crisis in the short term and in the long term is the climate dynamics in Iraq. Iraq is considered to be one of the top 5 countries to be hardest hit, expected to be hardest hit by the climate change. Temperatures in Iraq are increasing at 7 times the average global rate. This is leading to water evaporations, and it's also kind of Iraq's neighbors are building their dams to protect their own water resources, which Iraq is highly dependent on, therefore significantly decreasing water resources inside Iraq. What we are seeing as an impact of this is a lot of climate-induced migration, that similar dynamics to what my colleagues mentioned in other countries. Rural areas, families in rural areas, depending on farmers, moving to city centers, increasing strain on the employment, on infrastructure, on the whatever available resources are there. And it's also placing pressure on the social cohesion in these cities, causing conflict between these two populations. What we have seen so far is that this is mainly happening now in southern Iraq, but we have about 27,000 Iraqi families in Al-Hol that the Iraqi government has decided to repatriate back to Iraq. These families are also largely from rural areas in Iraq, but they are more in western and northern Iraq. So when these families are coming back, they will now find their farms, they will now find their livelihoods available. So they will also move to city centers, increasing this strain.
So what can GCERF do?
GCERF is there. Yeah, so on the climate front, honestly, what we will do in the southern Iraq, we are working through our local civil society organizations to build the capacities of the government entities and government committees that are responsible for kind of tackling this climate change issues and dynamics. But also we're spending a lot of effort and a great deal of support is to support the rehabilitation and reintegration of these families coming back from Al-Hol. We'll be doing, starting next month, hopefully, that we'll be working on ensuring these families are reintegrated through supporting their legal matters, their economics, their improving social cohesion, but also working with the local communities that will be hosting these families back, because this is a crucial step that we must take to ensure a successful reintegration of these families.
Thank you very much, and this is good to see that GCERF is trying to tackle from 2 angles, addressing issues related to climate and rehabilitation and reintegration. And let me turn to my colleague now, Kenesh, back from Kyrgyzstan, because Kyrgyzstan has been also affected by the phenomenon of people leaving and joining ISIS years ago. But the government of Kyrgyzstan is also making very conscious effort to return women and children, primarily from northeast Syria and Iraq. But we are aware that people are now leaving to join either the Russian or the Ukrainian side of the war. And this seems like really a vicious cycle. So in this, what can we do to break the vicious cycle of people joining whichever conflict?
Thank you, Lila, and hello, everyone. And it's my privilege to speak and share some limited knowledge with you. And as you know, Kyrgyzstan is one of the former Soviet Union countries, so hence it's a young democracy. And the pathway to building this democratic society is not that easy, as you can see. within the shortest period of time, my country has already faced 3 political events toppling the government, right? So we are still learning. And at the same time, I think on the other hand, if you reflect on the contingency of Central Asian recruits in ISIS, it was one of the largest. And still some of the remnants are still residing under the now the branding called ISKP, the Islamic State of Khorasan province. And it is also creating a lot of challenge and threat to the entire region. And, of course, it's a privilege to see Mr. Greminger, and during the time and was through the many international organizations, including OSCE, and the whole of government and whole of society approach has been really promoted and filtered down to Kyrgyzstan, and which ended up the country has adopted its national action plan. Already the second, the addition of it, and is being implemented. And but at the same time, the challenge still remains. And I would highlight 3 things. The first one is largely from the perspective of the education. It's about the functional literacy, and to what extent we are equipping the young people with the functional literacy skills. And the second one is about related with the ideology. In one hand, after the collapse of Soviet Union, there is a genuine religiosity among the public, and to get to know your religion, and through what sources, through whom you learn your religion, it's a different issue, right? But at the same time, grappling with the ideology is the independence, how we build our national identity under the independent Kyrgyzstan. And perhaps the third one is another natural, I would say the reality is the population growth. And out of entire former Soviet Union countries, the Central Asian countries, the 5 Central Asian countries are projected to be growing in by 2100. The fastest one is the Tajikistan with 47%, and the second one is the Kyrgyzstan with 27%, including, on top of what we have today, the population, the composition, which is like 33% of the population are the young people, right? So that is kind of a 3 pressure point, which is, in one hand, it's an optimism to break the vicious silence, but at the same time, it creates a challenge. Thank you.
I know that also GCERF is planning to start programming in Kyrgyzstan very, very soon. But there are some lessons learned, and GCERF has been working in the Western Balkans for quite a few years now when it relates to creating an enabling environment and also to rehabilitate and integrate people who are returned from northeast Syria and Iraq. What are perhaps some of the lessons learned or good practices that could be adapted from there and to applied in the Kyrgyz context?
Thank you for this question. And using this opportunity, I would like to extend the gratitude to GCERF, and as well as my ambassador, who has worked really hard to make the GCERF programming possible in Kyrgyzstan. And we are just opening up. And I think the 3 areas of the GCERF intervention, based on the lessons learned, I believe, from Western Balkans and Philippines, which are more advanced in our analysis, could be a good opportunity for Kyrgyzstan. The first one is largely the PCVE, the Preventing Violent Extremism, engaging some of the pertinent institutes in the society. The second one is, as you know, the Kyrgyzstan has started the repatriating its citizens from northern Syria and Iraq, and already 3 operations has happened this year, and another 3 are expected. So the challenges around the rehabilitation, reintegration, and socialization of the repatriants. And the third one is about is related with the former, the convicts who have been prisoned for quite some time, and they are serving their term out, and they will be out soon. And the challenge is about like how we can create an re-socialization programming in the country with 300 plus individuals who soon to be released. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenesh. And I'm just conscious of the second panel, which is about to come on board. But just let me, for my, and I think for the kind of 5 takeaway words from what we heard from the distinguished panel: connecting people, facilitating connection between young people, local governments, generations, and so on. Participatory, so really bringing them on board and giving them a platform and space to let their voice heard and support people in that. A multi-sectoral approach, extremely important, which also linked to the whole of society to approach. And I think what really kind of resonated, the spillover and homegrown, and how spillover can spill over into another area, and how this affects the entire cycle of violence. So I think we have a perhaps a little bit better understanding, because these contexts are all very different, but you can see some of the commonalities. And I would like to now really invite and hand over to my dear colleague Christina to reflect with the next panel on some of the things that our colleagues have said, and there will be an opportunity for questions and some answers after the second panel. Thank you so much.
So first, let me introduce to my left Mr. Itonde Kakoma, who is president of Interpeace since 2023. Prior to Interpeace, he most recently served as the permanent representative of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies to the African Union and international organizations. In this capacity, Mr. Kakoma advanced continental-wide humanitarian diplomacy initiatives with the African Union in public health, climate change, disaster risk management, and food security. Mr. Kakoma also served as Director for Global Strategy and member of the leadership team of the CMI, Martia Atisari Peace Foundation, as well as Assistant Director for the Conflict Resolution Program at the Carter Center, supporting former President Carter's back-channel diplomatic efforts there. Mr. Kakoma was also a global fellow at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, so we're delighted to have him back home here with us. Maud Rohr is the Deputy Director for Programs at the Kofi Annan Foundation, where she leads the development of the annual work plan for the foundation. Ms. Rohr also leads the Building Peace and Trust and Promoting Youth Leadership work at the foundation, and works on issues of transitional justice and reconciliation. She also coordinates the Extremely Together initiative, a youth-led effort to mobilize and enable young people to prevent violent extremism and the polarization in their society, and she will speak about that to us shortly. She is also, prior to working for the foundation, she was head of learning and policy and a member of the strategic management team at Interpeace. She gained hands-on peace-building experience at Interpeace's program officer for the Great Lakes region, and she also worked for the French Foreign Ministry in Namibia and UNDP in Niger and Amnesty International in Paris. So young and so experienced, really wonderful. So I am now lucky to chair this session, and I have a question going straight to Ms. Rohr. I wanted to ask you, after hearing about GCERF's national advisors and their programs and how they're working together with GCERF, what are some of the important takeaways that you have on how this resonates with the work that you also are doing at the Kofi Annan Foundation? Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for having me. Maybe my first takeaway is about this intersection that we heard about between violent extremism and climate change. That came up very strongly from almost all GCERF countries. And this is something that we've observed in the countries where we have PV programming. For instance, you may remember last year there were massive floods in Pakistan that submerged 1/3 of the country. And our Pakistani colleagues saw that the first organizations to reach the most isolated communities affected by the floods were Islamic relief organizations. And some of them, while they were providing the very needed assistance to these communities, also kind of exploited some of the grievances these marginalized communities had and spread divisive narrative. We also see in Pakistan that in this kind of rural-urban migration that we see, that young people coming from rural areas come to the cities on their own. They have kind of they lack all the community structure that usually hold them accountable back in the countryside, and they become very vulnerable to recruitment by violent extremist groups in the cities. And another example is from Uganda, where we saw recently increased recruitment efforts by violent extremist groups towards fishermen communities around Lake Victoria. Following floods, the water level of the lake has increased, and this led to the displacement of the communities who were living, fishing, and gardening on the lake shores. And as a result, they've lost their main source of livelihood, and they've become an easy target for extremists. So this led us at the Kofi Annan Foundation to rethink a little bit our own approach and to realize that we really needed to integrate these issues of climate change and environmental degradation into our PV approach. And we are about to launch baseline research in the 6 countries where we are active to better understand this intersection of these different threats and especially how they affect young people. So that's maybe my first takeaway, and if I have time, maybe for a second one.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
So my second takeaway is about the diversity of experiences that were presented by GCERF, from gender inclusion, youth inclusion, to economic empowerment, etc., etc. And I think it's a very good illustration of the importance of a comprehensive approach to PV-CV. And also, it's an illustration of how this field is constantly developing and expanding. And this resonates with our experience too, because we are constantly learning things and experimenting new approaches. For instance, hearing from GCERF's experience in Kyrgyzstan with the reintegration of former fighters, this made me think of our own experience in Uganda, where we're working also on the reintegration of former members of the ADF. And as we were working with these formers, we also realized that we actually needed to work also with victims of violent extremism, that it was creating tensions that, you know, these former members of the ADF would benefit from grants from the Amnesty Commission in Uganda and some kind of support, whereas victims would have absolutely no support in terms of, you know, dealing with their physical and psychological injuries and the loss of livelihoods, etc., etc. So this is something that we're learning along the way.
Thank you so much, and for reflecting on all the takeaways. And I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Kakome. Could you also give us a little bit of feedback on what you thought you heard today, and what role you hope Interpeace in the future will have in this domain?
Thank you for the opportunity, a deep expression of appreciation to colleagues at GCSP leadership, as well as out of GCERF, for giving us the chance to hear the first-hand and rich experience presented, let me reframe, if I may, a little bit the question. I was listening to the perspectives from our distinguished colleagues reflecting the areas in which you work at GCERF. I think, Maud, your second point touches on the core area for me in terms of intersectionality between issues. And having said that, I think if we were to extract the term countering violent extremism from this conversation, we could have been having a discussion on so many other global pressing issues at stake today for the current dynamics and for the future. So that raises a question for me on the uniqueness and specificity of what countering violent extremism means now versus, for example, I think all of the same factors would have been present had we had a conversation on the state and future of peace building. All of them. And that gets to the point, Maud, which I think you raised very well in terms of intersectionality of issues. Now, having said that, as an organization, we're marking 30 years in advancement of peace, accompanying those very communities, some of whom were referred to today already, not least of which being in Somalia, where we are honored to accompany various Somali communities, Burkina Faso, and many other environments and contexts and countries and communities. But I think, and I quote, dare I say, a distinguished colleague who serves as the president and CEO of the crisis group, Comfort Arrow, on a discussion we were in where she was talking about the crisis of global peacemaking. And I'm wondering how that pertains to what we're discussing now. In terms of being able to grapple with the manifold issues at play. I really wanted to hear you reflect more, our colleague from Somalia, on the climate narrative. I wonder if your reference in Pakistan touched on it. I'm not sure entirely. But I was curious what you meant by how a climate narrative is being used as a compelling means to attract young people in particular to an alternative, less constructive way of building social networks. And I say that because I think the entire field, let's say, of peacemaking in which I find myself is grappling with the exact same issues. So as an organization, we pride ourselves as being rooted in community. And across the board, as my colleagues will remind, including a former colleague and now a colleague in another way, another institution, all of what we're talking about is ultimately dependent upon trust. Trust within societies, communities themselves, and the very trust that those communities and societies at an individual level may also transfer to state systems. So as an organization that roots ourselves in community resilience and ownership, we also know that can get you only so far unless there is national structures in place to really ensure sustainability of that approach. And this is a question mark. When we get back to a crisis of peace building, it's also linked to a broader crisis of governance, a broader crisis of cooperation regionally and internationally, and how we position ourselves, complement a system that is drastically changing before our eyes is something that I believe applies to this conversation as well. And if not put on the table, if we look at these in isolation from one another, I think we miss the point of what is happening today. Because again, they're the same issues. One of my dear colleagues has encouraged me to draw a distinction, however, between particular conflict dynamics versus other types of pressing challenges that we face, be it in terms of climate or social inequalities, I'm not sure I agree. I think we see these now as interlinked, as further enshrined in the declaration during the COP28 recently hosted by UAE, in the declaration on climate resilience and peace, if I'm not mistaken, where they're saying you can't view these separately anymore because we know that major conflict drivers are going to be and are directly tied to vast social inequalities, to climate shocks, but also and increasingly geopolitical issues at play and polarization. How that fits in to our emphasis on social cohesion at a community level, I think is a big question. But it ultimately means that we need to create those spaces for global dialogue for it to be directly informed by the voices that we heard today and the communities who your colleagues are interacting with and our colleagues are interacting with. So that as we envision future means of stabilization beyond a securitized approach, we are doing so from a community lived experience perspective, but not absent of state systems and international cooperation.
Thank you so much for underscoring that. I'd like to now move back to the Kofi Annan Foundation, and I wanted to ask you about your important work on Extremely Together. We've already worked together on this initiative, but I think you'd open it up to the audience and explain a little bit what you've been doing in this field and who your youth workers are in Extremely Together.
Sure. So the Kofi Annan Foundation launched the Extremely Together initiative back in 2016. At the time, young people were nowhere to be seen in policy forums and programming related to the prevention of violent extremism. So our initial objective was really to make sure that the youth perspectives would be included. And so we selected a group of 10 young leaders from 10 different countries who were experts in PV, CV. And through the networks of Mr. Annan and the Kofi Annan Foundation, we managed to get them to speak at all sorts of fora, from the UN General Assembly to the EU and Commonwealth, etc. But progressively, we also started to have more of an operational approach. And so we started establishing national chapters of Extremely Together in a few countries, starting with Somalia and Uganda, and then moving into the Philippines and Pakistan. And our approach is to train a core group of young people in PV in understanding what is violent extremism, what can be done about it. Then in supporting them to lead actions that strengthen social cohesion in their communities. And we do that through providing seed grants, technical expertise, and mentorship. And then we also connect them with decision makers because we know that for change to happen, we also need to involve decision makers. And through this work, we have trained over 7,000 young people. We have supported hundreds of youth-led projects to strengthen social cohesion. And this project varied greatly from facilitating dialogue between young people from IDP camps around Mogadishu with the security forces, to using radio communities and theater to really address stereotypes and biases between different religious groups, for instance. And we have so what we do is that we constantly learn from our work and also compare experiences between countries and between youth groups. And so we have also produced a training manual for youth organization especially, but also lessons learned about how to engage young people in PV, because PV can sound as a very sensitive, political, a bit dangerous topic or technical topic. So we've learned a lot about how do you engage young people, how do you make it relatable to them and interesting to them.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to pass the floor now back to you. You had mentioned about community resilience for peace when addressing violent extremism, but what would you consider when it comes to managing negative manifestations of resilience?
Well, thank you for this. And, this has brought about so many different reflections, so you'll forgive me, and I hope my colleagues will, if I totally go off script. Because I think part of the challenge that we're also facing, we've raised some pretty big issues today, and that GCERF is grappling with on a daily basis, is the normalization in political life of violent extremist rhetoric in other forms. And what that means for dealing with this, not just in the countries represented on the stage prior to us, but also in countries that have experienced, let's say, prolonged periods of political stability, but are being faced with extreme forms of political rhetoric amounting to violence. And I think this is a new phase, or rather a return to an earlier phase that we as a community aren't prepared for. Particularly if it's occurring in societies and states that have traditionally been investing in our work to present an alternative way. And if that's occurring in those quote unquote more stable societies, what's then the reference point? That's a big question for me and for our sector more broadly. Because it also says something's gone awry with the compelling approaches to social cohesion through the peaceful participation in politics. I don't know what that means then in terms of this, but what I would say is that a similar amount of investment should be made in alternatives, demonstrating what social cohesion looks like as well, but not removed from the responsibility of national systems, and ideally further strengthened by regional and international cooperation. We know those are in crisis, and an organization such as ourselves or yours cannot replace that. But that's where continued accompaniment of communities, as described today, becomes crucial, but by no means a replacement for strong, durable systems.
I'm going to play my Swiss neutrality card, but I hear you very loudly and very clearly, and we are all very worried about what's happening in the United States.
I did not reference a specific.
I know. So we are going to stay on subject here. We're going to continue talking about PVE, but it is a very important point that you underscored, because it's hard to talk about PVE when it's manifested at such a high level in such an important countries also.
Yeah,
we would add Europe also as a new domain. And it's the problem of extremism feeding other types of extremism. And it's a rotation you can watch. The extremists feed each other, and there are different types of extremism all over the world, and it creates this incredible, important rise of extremism globally, and which is really manifested right today. And it's really worrisome on a global scale. We're worried about it. Well, let's get back to youth-focused and community-level focused PVE programs. How are you going to deal with this new kind of globalization of hate at sort of the youth level? Do you see any hope in the youth peace and security programs that the UN is bringing out, or national action plans? How do you see these programs as moving forward?
Maybe just coming back to this very issue of the violence rhetoric that we hear everywhere, that is growing, that is really a matter of concern to us. And I think there are many responsibilities. And I think we should also look into our own responsibilities as peace-building organization, because I think it also goes hand in hand with the lack of confidence of the general public in peace and dialogue efforts. I think peace and dialogue are seen as passé, and those who still believe in these approaches are seen as naive, and that's really worrisome. I think that part of our responsibility is also as peace-building organizations is that we may not have been good enough at showcasing our success, the successes of peace processes, and at demonstrating our impact. So for me, it's really a key topic to reflect about what can we do better. And I think GCERF and GCSP's event today is also one way to showcase, that actually not everything is gloomy, but there are really interesting successes in different countries.
Absolutely, and I think... Absolutely, thank you for that. And I think it's really important also, I'm still waiting for that book to come out on all the PV practices globally and which ones are the most successful. I know that there are books on region as a regional giving regional perspectives, but actually a global book looking at how national action plans and PV programs have worked globally would be a book that I think would be incredible addition to academic work and would also help all of us here. But we're here all together, and you are at the cusp of governing Interpeace, so you can literally plan ahead for the future. So what are some of the things that you're looking at Interpeace that you want to perhaps collaborate with GCERF, with the Kofi Annan Foundation, with us at the GCSP on PV? How can we grow our forces together?
This is a big strategic question. For less than 4 months on the job, you're asking me what my board is asking me. But I would say this. Number one, it's not business as usual. In terms of this, the field, the state of peace building and the future therein. So the way in which we approach our strategic direction needs to have the level of humility to know that the world is drastically changing and will continue to do so. And in the midst of that, at least two things stand out, of many. Number one, I think, and this is not a cliche expression, I mean it wholeheartedly, the strength of our institution moving forward is also subject to the quality and depth of our ability to forge meaningful, respectful partnership. I mean, this notion of, and I quote a dear mentor, our first chair, former president of Finland, who said, in crude Finnish terms, you can't do a damn thing alone. And I believe that. So that's part of the humility, is understanding where, in multiple sectors, you can forge those meaningful partnerships. And I think secondly, while the rootedness in locality is absolutely essential, we have to move beyond a projectized approach to peace building and look at scale in a meaningful, impactful way. Otherwise, we won't move beyond the seismic nature of the issues presented on the earlier panel. Of many factors that can help with colleagues look forward to hopefully another 30, if not more, years as a strong institution.
Thank you for that. And I know you are all very eager to ask questions also to our GCERF experts. So I'm going to now open the floor. For those of you who have any questions, please raise your hand. And if you would like to, also introduce yourself. So who would like to begin? Yes, please. Natasha, we're going to open the floor to the intercom so you can just speak.
So it's Natasha Ritskov. I'm a fellow here at the GCSP and from the Leone Peace and Security Forum. So one of the naive people who still does believe in the peace processes. One of the things we've been really focusing on is really the piece that you're speaking about. How do we make sure that what's happening at the community level is reflected into our multilateral systems so that we get credibility back into those? And we're trying to find ways as Leone to input into processes like the Summit of the Future, New Agenda for Peace, all of these things. How well are you finding, both Kofi Annan, GCERF, and obviously Interpeace, ways of bringing the speakers that we had before you, groups like ours and yours, to really having an impact on that multilateral space?
Please go. Who would like to be? Or perhaps we'll get one other question, and then we'll. Who else would like to ask a question? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, hello. I'm one of the colleagues from GCERF. I'm Faris Mahwashi, junior associate in charge of the Tunisia and the Middle East portfolios. We have many challenges in the portfolio of Tunisia, for example, that we work on. And we've been working on it since 2018. But one thing that we've been seeing in the last few months, given the crisis and the war on Gaza, the efforts of de-radicalization kind of paused. How do we mitigate these kind of global crises that we can't really work on in the terms of community because they're much bigger than the local communities? But how can we think of ways to mitigate the issues on the ground with the young people? Because a lot of young people now, what I'm seeing is they don't believe in multilateral organizations anymore and their role in bringing justice. They don't believe in the role of the bigger states. The non-state actors now are much more attractive alternative to these young people, and they don't see other ways for the justice they want to see as they share the sorrow with their with people around the world, especially.
Thank you. Who would like to begin?
Happy to say a word, Natasha. It's good to see you.
Actually,
Sorry?
we can just speak.
Okay, very good. It's good to see you, and thank you for this. The term naive is interesting to me, and I agree with it, with regards to what it appears like in the state of the world we're in, where the calls for the use of violent force far outweigh what appears to be the calls in a very constructive, clear, convincing way for peace. Naive, I'm not sure, but I can say it's almost provocative to talk about peace in a global context in which the calls, again, for alternatives to peace, the use of violence, are dominating. Your specific question, I think, has at least two elements behind it. Number one, our ability to engage in fora like the Summit for the Future. We're doing the best we can. We're working hand in hand with not only DPPA, but PBSO in terms of trying to convene broader voices, especially from global civil society. Honored to serve as a co-chair in that space with PBSO. But then we have to ask another question. And I know my colleagues will say, what are you doing? But are those the fora that will ultimately provide the way forward in the future? I'm not sure. There are numerous such summits. Are they amounting to the level and quality required for the scope of issues we face today? I'm not sure. What I do know is that the norms established over this period, not least of which being, touched on earlier very clearly, women, peace, and security, youth, peace, and security, for me, go beyond normative frameworks. If we as an organization and our peers don't take those as standard ways in which we engage, we are totally missing the point. We're missing the reality. Correct me if I'm wrong, a colleague told me in Somalia recently, 75% of the population, youth. So if we're engaging in that kind of a context without a youth, peace, and security lens, we're missing the point in terms of how change is occurring. Final point. I think the nature and almost total destruction approach to the way in which wars and conflict are being carried out has direct consequence for discussion today. You can go from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan and look at total destruction of cities and communities. How you come out of that has consequence for the prevention question we're talking about today on so many levels. And I'm not even sure where to begin there, but I think the ways in which armed conflict is being put forward really will define the future generation. And that's tied to international law, not least of which being humanitarian law, but human rights law, and a host of other intersecting legal regimes that have direct consequence on the credibility of the arguments we're putting forward in terms of peacemaking.
Thank you. Over to you.
Well, we tried last year. We developed an initiative. Our idea was to actually consult young people from different countries to make sure that we could bring their voices to the Summit of the Future, and especially the discussions around the new agenda for peace. And we got a lot of pushback because there was too much attention put onto the Summit of the Future, and at the time in the UN and the States, they didn't want it to dominate at the time when the SDG Summit was coming up. So we had planned really ahead of time to really have meaningful consultations of young people, and then we couldn't implement this project because of this pushback, and then it became too short to have a meaningful consultation process. And I think for us it was a bit of a frustration, and I think it's also reflective of the youth, peace and security agenda. We see a lot of progress made at the international level, normative level, with, for instance, the EU Youth Action Plan and other progress like that. But it doesn't really trickle down at the national level, and maybe that's also the case in Tunisia, where it's still, young people still faces a lot of challenges when it comes to engaging with decision makers, with elevating their needs and their priorities. So through our work on the youth, peace and security, we really try to connect young people and decision makers. We also believe a lot in intergenerational dialogue, because it's not only about youth needs, but it's also about how do you connect the needs and experience of different generations, and how together we can address some of the challenges. But it's a big challenge, and unfortunately that creates a lot of frustration, and that we see a lot in our work too.
I just wanted to underline, so the last UN Security Council resolution 2035 actually broke new ground by introducing language on the protection of civic and political space. And it stressed the importance of providing opportunities for young people to strengthen resilience against radicalization, to violent and terrorist recruitment by creating politics for youth. And I thought that was hopeful. So we're getting back to the hope. I'm now, and I know our director, we have one more question. Yes, please go ahead. Or whoever, I'm sorry, did you highlight somebody? Oh, yes. Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kevin Osborne with GCERF. It was just to respond a bit to the question that you posed about how we're engaging the organizations that we work with and our advisors in multinational, multilateral fora and organizations. I think there's a couple of examples. One is through GCERF's Global Action Platform, which focuses on several specific thematics. One of them is rehabilitation, reintegration. Another is on work in prisons, de-radicalization in prisons. There's several other thematics that we're focusing on. And grantees are coming together with good practices. They're putting together knowledge products and they're publishing them. And they're sharing those publications at different fora. Another example is through the Global Counterterrorism Forum, which is what kind of GCERF came out of several years ago. And we brought together civil society partners to contribute to certain framework documents that then are on the Global Counterterrorism Forum website and are used in different meetings as guidance documents. So coming back to the rehabilitation and reintegration, that's one. How to engage community-based organizations is another. And I think, several of our, like for example, Omar next week is going to Malta to participate in a Strong Cities Network event to share about the work that they're doing in Iraq, helping to cascade down national plans to provincial levels. So I think, we in the Secretariat and GCERF were like 30 or 40 in number, but when you take the advisors and then the grants, where there's hundreds of grantees that we funded, we often are calling upon them and inviting them to different fora to share what their experiences are. And many of them are involved in the kind of activities that were mentioned before about youth affecting policy at a national level or at a local level, or different marginalized populations feeling, that they have a say in things and being able to put together very specific policy frameworks. So we haven't lost hope in it at all. And as we continue to fund more and more organizations, the voice of the community is louder and louder, in my view, at these multinational, multilateral fora. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now we're going to give the final word to the director of the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, Dr. Khalid Koser.
Christine, we've got 30 seconds, so I'll be quick. Firstly, some thank yous. Secondly, just some points that I noted from a very interesting discussion. Thanks, firstly, to the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. This place is close to my heart. I was a deputy director here. You heard that GCERF, our organization, was incubated here. Christina, congratulations to you on raising this issue within the GCSP environment. And many thanks to Thomas, of course, for being a great friend. Kofi Annan Foundation, we have enjoyed partnering with you and look forward to continuing to partner with you. Maud, you personally are a member of our independent review panel, so thank you for your unpaid support to GCERF. Itonde, looking forward to lots of unpaid support from you as well, but also looking forward to partnering with Interpeace. Let's please take this forward. It's a great moment for us to collaborate. Most of all, if I may, I'd like to thank our national advisors. You heard from 6 of 16 of them, in awe of your hard work, in awe of your commitment. Thank you very much for being here and thanks for your hard work. And I think a round of applause for the national advisors in particular. Finally, just some very quick points. We had hoped, and I think we did, to make this a slightly more positive outlook. This is a fairly gloomy environment in which we're living. I think the global environment is more conducive to violent extremism and terrorism than it probably has been for the last 10 or 20 years. I tried to note down some positives. Let's end this, if we can, fairly positively. Firstly, the network, bringing together these Geneva institutions, not just the ones on the panel, but also I know the other ones represented within this room. I think that matters. The missions, the organizations, International Geneva. I think bringing together a network of people who are committed to the same cause is important, and that's something that I take away as being positive. Communities, communities, communities. Everyone spoke about the positive, innovative, inspirational things that are taking place on the ground amongst communities, and let's continue to support that as far as we can. I think what we've done today is provided a megaphone. We've sort of projected local, small successes that most of us don't know anything about and tried to elevate them to a slightly bigger audience, and let's continue to do that. Let the global learn from the local, because that's the local, I think, is where the future is and where the positive lies. Fourthly, women and youth, clearly. I mean, it's a note that came up across almost everything we heard today. Women and youth are in the lead, especially at the community level, not yet represented enough, by the way, at the international level. I heard quite positive things about governance, national action plans and priorities. Even despite coups in some countries in the Sahel, there is still a commitment amongst the authorities to take this stuff seriously. And I think that's an important point that we should take away positively. Two final points. I was surprised and pleased not to hear more about the spillover into local communities around the world from Ukraine and from Israel and Gaza. If in any way those terrible crises are being isolated and not having downstream consequences, that's something to celebrate. I'm not sure it's true, but it's something to celebrate, or at least try to hold onto. And the final point I noted, Itonde, really from you, if, and I agree with you, all of these agendas are coming together, I think that gives us an opportunity. It means we're working towards a common cause, whether you're coming from the Kofi Annan Foundation or a local community or Interpeace or GCERF or GCSP, you can provide part of the answer to this common goal. And I think that commonality is something we should hold on to. So thanks again to all of you, and thanks again to GCSP. Thank you.
Possible comment?
Yes, please go ahead.
Just very briefly, yeah. Yeah, hello everybody. Ambassador of Kyrgyzstan, Sultan of, thank you to GCSP and GCERF for organizing it, especially for GCSP for organizing this event. And once again, I'm once again convinced that as there is a grassroots democracies and there is also grassroots security. And so the mandate of GCERF is as actual as it was never actual as it is now, because as we see, there's those challenges. We discussed about global challenge of climate, global challenge, but still the real change can be done at this grassroots level. And so I think that GCERF would serve this more and more. Well, the importance of your mandate will be, unfortunately, in this regard, but will be ever increasing. Yeah, thank you for this event. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. Our next Geneva Security debate will be on the 13th of February. So it's not on Valentine's Day, but the day before. So please do come. We are delighted. It will be on gender and security. We're looking at women, peace and security issues. So please do come on the 13th of February. I'd like to thank Sophie Ingelaar, who has been instrumental in bringing you all here. Our numbers were low yesterday. I don't know what you did, but you're all here. I'm delighted. Thank you so much. And thank you also for everyone in the back who's also Bérangère and Florian, who's literally holding up the fort here in our digital world. So thank you, and we'll see you all on the 13th. In the meantime, I hope you have a peaceful afternoon. I like the way that began with our Philippines expert today. And I wish you also a peaceful year. So God take care.
Thank you. At least.
You now.